The episode starts with hundreds of people underwater near Seattle. A mother breathes air into her daughter and swims her to the surface. Meanwhile, Sheriff Jude was in yoga class when his deputy Nestor informed him of a body washing up on Thorn Beach. As Nestor and Jude drive to the beach, it was clear that they were in a small coastal town near Seattle. Nestor, a local, recalls his youth at Thorn Beach, while Jude, recently from Oakland, remains tight-lipped about his past. They find a body, then another, and an unconscious but alive little girl. Nestor calls for an ambulance and notices hundreds of bodies in the water and on the beach. Hours later, the Coast Guard and responders were still recovering people, most beyond saving. Homeland Security agent Emma Wren informs Jude that there was no evidence of a shipwreck or missing vessels. Jude approaches the little girl he rescued, Leia, and Leia says that she lost her mom in the water and they were fleeing from a future war in America. A nearby man explains to Jude that Leia's experiences are from events that haven't happened yet. The next morning, Jude finds Nestor handling a new case involving the town's serial mugger. The survivors are being taken care of on the beach. They were having their photos and handprints and other information taken. Emma informs the upset Jude that his clearance has revoked and the operation was streamlined. She orders him not to discuss Thorn Beach and promises taking points. Leia's mom wakes up on the deck of a fishing boat, coughing up water, lucky to be alive. Bryce delivers Jude's talking points, which falsely state that all beach victims died. Jude calls Emma to complain, but she brings up his troubled past in Oakland and insists keeping the story low-key to benefit everyone, especially him. Reese was taken by a fisherman to a dockside restaurant, and she speaks Russian to the Captain Kurt, but denies being Russian. As she listens to her surroundings, she hears Jude's press conference, and the refugees discuss their situation, and Caleb appreciates the supplies, while Abigail dislikes the animal meat. Thomas enjoys being at the top of the food chain, and Caleb speaks about starting over. Jude leaves the sheriff's office and gets into a car, and Reese was in the back seat holding his rifle to his head. Reese convinces Jude to drive her to the bodies, causing a diversion to check the children's corpses. Realizing survivors exist, she overpowers Jude in security, escaping, and Emma and Bryce review the footage but refuse to share details with Jude, who believes Reese is a refugee and a threat. The refugees are taken to an old summer camp, with Leia staying with Caleb and Rebecca. Emma and Bryce realize the apex threat is serious after Reese's attack. Jude catches Reese sneaking into his home, and after she reveals she's looking for her daughter, he agrees to listen. In a flashback, Reese, a law enforcement agent, and her partner find a room of dead commons with a rash like Leia's. They discover a crying baby, and as her partner prepares to shoot it, it flashes back to the present. Jude takes Reese to the beach to find Leia, telling her to stay in the car. The refugees have already moved, leaving the beach empty, and Reese insists that Leia can't be away from her, and Jude empathizes, knowing parental separation. Jude offers continued help if he can trust her, and she agrees. Jude takes Reese to his house, telling her to stay hidden. He reassures his son Oliver about their trip despite the chaos. Jude makes Reese promise to leave once she finds her daughter, and Nestor arrives, suspecting Jude had a woman inside, but moves on to the business after Jude declines to share details. Reese explores Jude's belongings, finding a photo of Oliver, which triggers a memory of her bringing Leia home. Her partner objected, fearing legal trouble, but Reese refused to give up Leia. In the present, Reese found Jude's cash box and car keys, and she discovers a 1970s Chevrolet with a dismantled engine, but being Apex, understands how to fix it using the manual. Emma updates Lindauer, who insists on finding Reese without involving Jude or local police. Lindauer dismisses the Apex story, viewing Reese as a terrorist. He claims DNA tests on refugees are for genealogy, though they clearly come from a diverse background. Lindauer gains a henchman and awaits his boss's arrival, learning that an Apex reached the present. The henchman was eager to kill Reese despite orders for a quick death. A cop interrupts Reese's memories, recognizing the Chevelle. He orders her out, but she takes off, leading to a vintage car chase. Reese eventually ditches the car and escapes with her supplies, and Jude spots Reese at the station and instructs Nestor to detain Marshall. Jude confiscates Reese's bag, upset by the hunting knife inside. Reese explains she's there because she promised her daughter, and Leia reveals a rash diagnosed as Malt's disease. She rushed to isolation, but Rebecca, exposed, isn't isolated. Jude drives Reese to find Leia, sending mixed signals reflecting his failed marriage. Reese recalls reporting to her superiors about a rumored time travel device Commons is allegedly developing. Jude tricks Reese into a boathouse room and locks her in, and then demands Emma meet him or he'll expose the refugee situation. Emma agrees and informs her boss Lindauer, who prepares an attack. Emma heads to meet Jude, but strike teams arrive. Gas canisters knock Jude out, and Reese pretends to be unconscious and then escapes by shooting at soldiers and jumping into the water. Lindauer convinces the Secretary of Homeland Security that refugee stories are a hoax and avoids involving the FBI. He assures control over the situation off the books, and Lindauer informs a shadowy woman that he's managing the refugees, and she insists no one must know that they exist. Jude wakes up unharmed and prepares for Oliver's arrival, and Emma calls explaining lethal force was used on Reese and needs to discuss more, but Jude refuses, focusing on Oliver. Reese, injured, reaches the store for medical supplies and inquires about poor Kanan. Reese treats her bullet wounds in a store bathroom, removing a large bullet from her shoulder. Lindauer visits his command center, frustrated they haven't found Reese's body. His apex hunter reassures him and reveals a new weapon for the fight. Lindauer intimidates his hostage Thomas into spreading his message at the refugee camp. Luke threatens Hannah, hinting at blackmail for sex over her past. She then quickly moves away. Hannah asks Roy for help escaping the camp, but he declines to avoid losing his job. Reese runs through the forest, evading strike teams, and Lindauer's goon track her down, while Hannah escapes in Roy's truck but leaves her sweater behind. Lindauer tells Emma that a specialist will examine Leia, not mentioning real help. Leia has severe symptoms, and Emma and Lindauer argue over handling Jude, ending with Lindauer threatening to remove Emma from the case. Lindauer hires Sophie and tasks her with discreetly diagnosing infections, ignoring her prevention concerns. Reese, rapidly healing, ambushes a contractor to find Leia's location. At the camp, Emma meets Sophie, who is surprised it's not quarantined. Emma trusts the refugees' accounts, contrary to what Lindauer told Sophie. Hannah explores Harborfest, experiencing present-day culture for the first time. She spots Marshall, remembers her lost locket with his picture, and asks him to show her around. They eat by the water, discussing their hometowns, and he plans to move to LA, but she thinks she should stay. Emma calls Thomas into her office to ask about his change in story. Scared, he tells her that he was lying before. Emma went to Jude and insisted that they talk, revealing she suspects an earlier refugee migration known by high-level government officials. Still upset by the boathouse, Jude asks why she involves him. She trusts him to investigate prior migrations, and Jude reacts negatively, not wanting to deal with corruption and secrets again. Sophie, in a hazmat suit, visits Leia and learns her mom treated her illness without medicine, as her mom was the cure. Reese takes out the strike team, injuring one with a teammate's bullet. Sophie asks Rebecca about Leia's illness and learns Leia's mom's blood was the cure. Rebecca understands but rejects the implication, refusing to speak further. Roy finds Hannah's sweater and searches for her, and Hannah and Marshall enjoy the concert, and she wanted to see him more, but he warns her not to trust strangers. Roy then comes and takes Hannah despite Marshall's reluctance, and Reese confronts Lindauer's goon, pointing a weapon, and he uses a sonic device that causes her intense pain. When she suffers, he taunts her, eager to torment an apex again. Emma investigates the refugees and Leia's illness, but finds all records wiped. Realizing something was wrong, she hangs up. Roy drives Hannah back to camp, insisting she's safe. Hannah disagrees, feeling disliked, but won't say why. Luke waits in Hannibal's cabin, threatening to expose her past as an Apex collaborator unless she submits to him. He claims control over her at the camp. Jude realizes he broke his promise to help Reese find Leia and didn't search for her after she was hurt. He rushes back to find Oliver but only finds his stuffed shark, and Jude tracks Oliver's phone while Reese takes him on the run. Reese calls Jude demanding to exchange Oliver for Leia tomorrow, wanting him not to involve anyone else. Jude agrees and reassures Oliver over the phone, and Reese promises to call with an exchange location in a few hours. Jude finds Oliver's phone, but Reese and Oliver have already switched cars and escaped. Marshall figures out that Hannah was one of the Thorn Beach refugees, and believes the survivors are at the camp that Thomas was at. Jude rushes to the camp, demanding to see Emma, but is denied. He forces his way in and tells Emma that Reese has kidnapped Oliver. Emma forgives him when she hears this, and Jude reveals Reese is Leia's mom, wanting Leia back. Emma says they can't take Leia due to her contagious condition, causing Jude to argue. Reese takes Oliver to a river to fish but lacks poles, and she forcibly takes fishing gear from nearby men when they preposition her, and Oliver doesn't notice. Emma introduces Jude to Dr. Forbin, who says Leia has 48 hours to live, and Jude explains that Reese and Oliver's situation. Jude wanted Leia with her mom, but Dr. Forbin refuses. Jude threatens to expose them to Leia's illness unless she helps. Emma finds Leia's isolation tent empty, and Jude and Dr. Forbin left to take Leia to Reese, hoping her blood can save Leia. Oliver teaches Reese to fish, and she's surprisingly skilled. Reese calls Jude, who lies about having Leia, explaining to Dr. Forbin that Reese is unpredictable. Hannah tries to attack Luke but finds Caleb instead, and Caleb questions her and deduces Luke's threat, and she eventually admits she's worked with Apex. Emma decides to run Paul's drawing through facial recognition off the books, bypassing Lindauer's influence. While driving to meet Reese, Dr. Forbin questions Jude about Reese's immaturity and Apex abilities. Jude confirms her enhanced traits, but insists Reese is dangerous, not the future of human evolution. Caleb confronts Luke, ordering him to leave Hannah alone. Luke accuses Hannah of being a collaborator, and Caleb threatens him if he harms Hannah. Jude tells Reese Leia was dying and brings her doctor instead. Dr. Forbin suggests trading places with Oliver to help create Leia's treatment, and Reese agrees, and meanwhile, Oliver safely waits at Jude's house. Jude informs Emma he traded Dr. Forbin for Oliver. Emma, concerned for Sophie's safety, plans to visit Jude's office. Emma's friend identifies Dr. Greta Pryor from facial recognition. Emma questions Dr. Pryor, who claims Paul, her husband, joined a cult. While examining photos, Emma sees Lindauer in one. Dr. Pryor shoots Emma, leaving her bleeding on the floor. Marshall relives the car accident that kills his mother. In his nightmare, the car swerves off a hill to avoid people standing in the road. He wakes up and tells Nestor about the memory, and Nestor dismisses it as his dad's crazy story, knowing that no one was found at the scene. Sophie and Reese break into a lab, and Emma misses her meeting with Jude. Nestor informs Jude that Agent Bryce, looking for Emma, was waiting for him, and Emma has been missing since the night before. Eve returns home to an angry Lindauer, and they argue about Emma's shooting, and Eve reveals Paul is her husband, wanting to know how he is. Jude finds Emma's laptop and ID in her hotel room, and Jude takes it to the station. Marshall tells his friend about Caleb's call, and his dad Jerry urges him to leave town, but Marshall remembers the accident wasn't his dad's fault. Sophie needs Reese's bone marrow for the serum. Reese, impatient with questions, performs the procedure herself and warns Sophie to forget everything once Leia was cured. In 2011, Jake's group plans to stop Apex by assassinating 27 key individuals. Lindauer hesitates when his target has a child. At the station, Jude's expert finds Emma using an easy-to-hack public file site, implying she wanted her work discovered. Jude then learns that Emma left critical information about Port Kanan. Nurses at the refugee camp worry about Leia's fading chances, and another unconscious girl needing better care but unable to leave. While waiting for Leia's treatment, Sophie asks Reese about adopting Leia. Reese shares a brief version. Sophie relates having been adopted after being abandoned. A nurse calls Sophie, reporting Leia's condition worsening, and Sophie instructs more of the same medicine. Reese panics, but Sophie promises to heal Leia. Nestor, upset over Jude's secrets and time travelers, summarizes the known facts and gets to work. Flashback to 2016, the first wave mission is complete. Jake insists that they've changed the future, and Eve tells Lindauer that Beaumont killed his target, who only lived a few extra months. Marshall reflects at his mother's crash site, and Claire arrives, suggesting fate can't be changed. Marshall dislikes this, but agrees to go to LA with Claire. Reese and Sophie finish Leia's serum, and Reese collects DNA traces. A guard finds them, but Reese disables him. She tells Sophie her mother left because of her heart condition, and Leia recovers quickly after receiving the serum, surprising Sophie and the nurse. Sophie wonders about the serum's potential, and Hannah calls Marshall, saying that she'll explain later why they're kept at the camp. She hangs up when people approach, and Nestor arrives, taking Marshall to Jude. The first Weavers argue, with Jake blaming others. Eve proposes a bolder plan to prevent Apex threatening anyone who wants out. Jake tries to leave, but is forced to stay. Marshall tells Jude and Nestor about the car accident, recognizing Beaumont as a witness who didn't help. Eve plans to capture Reese to obtain DNA samples, shocking Lindauer. She insists that they must do whatever it takes to prevent Apex's future. At the camp, a doctor finds a brand, not a rash, on a girl who aspirated seawater, revealing abuse. Sophie tells Rebecca Leia was healed and plans to send her to Portland General for a checkup, and Rebecca warns not to trust Reese. Caleb discovers an electrified fence around the camp and questions Bryce, who provides unconveying reassurances. Flashback: Jude meets Martin to discuss Corey's murder by a corrupt officer, Duquette, and Jude is determined to testify despite potential backlash. In the present, Martin meets Jude, who explains the refugee situation, and Martin can only offer limited help due to his major trial. Marshall plays music for Hannah over the phone, and they talk about music and meeting again. Caleb takes the phone, asks about media coverage, and tells Marshall about the new fence and guards. Gabe urges Marshall to expose the cover-up. Caleb sends photos, which Marshall and Gabe post on conspiracy sites. Despite Gabe's warning, Marshall proceeds. Sophie mixes Reese's stem cells with her blood, which glows, shocking her. They meet in the woods to plan Leia's escape from the hospital at 3 during Sophie's break. Sophie was helping because she wishes her mom had fought for her. Sophie shows Reese photos of a healthier Leia, and Reese was moved but denies healing anyone else and leaves. Lindauer sees Leia's reports and Caleb's photos, prompting a swift response. Bryce announces a camp search for the banned phone, urging refugees to turn it in. Hannah, on the phone with Marshall, misses the announcement. Roy searches her cabin, but she hides the phone and distracts him successfully. Reese asks Kurt, the fishing boat captain, to help her get forged IDs for her and Leia, leveraging his past mob connections. Jude visits his ex-wife to pick up Oliver and notices her redecorations. She asks about his case, and he vaguely mentions a missing persons case. Kurt takes Reese to a forge, and she wrestles his gun, reveals a duffel bag of cash, and admits that she got it by breaking open an ATM. In the camp cafeteria, Hannah's phone rings. Rebecca fakes a cough to cover the sound, and Hannah passes the phone to Caleb under the table, and Thomas overhears it. Jude returns home with Oliver and confronts Amy, realizing she won't move closer. She reveals she's met someone and is happy. Lindauer tells Sophie that she's done at the camp and her research is now government property. She rushes back but is locked out, and her heart problems start acting up. Caleb talks to Marshall, who says that the camp photos were called a hoax, and guards find Caleb likely tipped off by Thomas. Caleb leaves the phone line open as he approaches the guards, watched by refugees. Jude arrives for his meeting with Martin's contact, but senses something is wrong and leaves. Sophie tells Reese that Leia was still missing, and Reese plans to infiltrate the camp to find her. Sophie pleads for more stem cells to cure illnesses, including her own, but Reese refuses and hangs up. Sophie's heart condition worsens while driving, and she tries to get her medication but passes out, causing her car to roll off the road. Reese arms herself heavily from the forger-turned-arms dealer, planning to break into the camp for Leia. Thomas finds a liquor bottle with a well-done note, and Caleb confronts him for snitching about the phone. Thomas denies it, but Caleb uses his military interrogation skills to confirm it, and Caleb then breaks Thomas' legs as a warning. Nestor stops Lindauer for erratic driving, and Jude arrives and finds a gun with a filed-off serial number in Lindauer's car. Lindauer claims that it's from an investigation, and Naomi, the drowning victim, wakes up and asks about Eli, who threatened her. Jude spars with Lindauer over Emma's disappearance, making empty threats. The mayor insists Jude release Lindauer, who offers day passes for refugees. Rebecca worries about Leia's safety due to her apex mother. Caleb is skeptical, but Rebecca and Leia join a bus trip to town, observed by Reese. Naomi, confused by her new situation, asks for markers, and Jude, Nestor, Marshall, and the mayor meet the refugee bus. Jude tries to get Rebecca to open up, learning she resents the 20th century and fears for Leia's safety. Leia wanders into a store, receives a message from Reese and hides it, and an elderly man finds Hannah's locket on the beach. Marshall and Hannah sneak away for a boat ride alone, despite Roy's warning to stick together. Jude and Rebecca teach Leia to swing while Reese watches. Hannah uses a bathroom with a skylight, allowing Reese to grab Leia, and Jude helps them by removing Leia's tracker and lets them go. Rebecca was furious, but Jude insists Reese will keep Leia safe. Marshall and Hannah picnic on the beach while she reveals that they came from the future to escape war. Marshall, disbelieving, leaves for whiskey, and meanwhile Naomi writes an Apex, revealing she was an Apex slave. Hannah finds her locket at the stall but is caught stealing it, and Roy retrieves her in the locket, which has Marshall's photo, prompting questions. Reese and Leia hide in a hotel but are tracked via Leia's stuffed bunny. Feds capture them violently, with Lindauer watching and confirming the capture, and Jude realizes Lindauer's deception too late. Reese is held hostage in a lab by Lindauer in a twilight state, reliving her past. Jude and the mayor hold a town meeting to address the concerns about detaining US citizens, and Gabe reveals Hannah's photos, inciting a protest. Rebecca, distressed about Leia's departure, confronts Caleb about leaving their enslaved daughter, Rachel, behind. Caleb then tries to console her, and Rebecca learns from Naomi that Apex took neurodiverse children like Rachel for their abilities. The doctor tells Lindauer that Reese's cells self-destruct, and Greta suggests bringing Leia to Reese, but Lindauer worries about Leia's health. Lindauer visits Sophie, offering threats and an insincere offer to resume her research on Reese if she gets a viable DNA sample. Sophie, tempted by the chance to cure her condition, responds with dark humor. Jude leaves Nestor to manage the protest and heads to the camp to warn Bryce. Gabe urges Marshall to join the protest, but Marshall refuses. Roy interrogates Hannah, who receives her future in the locket story, and they're interrupted by a boy who found something in the woods. Naomi tells Rebecca her speciality in history, used by Apex to analyze patterns. And Naomi claims to be a prophet in the present and asks Rebecca if she can trust her. Jude arrives at the camp as the protest escalates. Bryce shows him Emma's body found by a boy, and her car was found nearby and a gun was missing. Sophie is shocked to find Reese strapped down and agrees to help Lindauer. Refugees are rounded up and the murder weapon is found in Paul's locker. And Caleb defends Paul, but agents threaten him, and Agent Roy tells Jude that Paul was asking about Emma, making him an unlikely suspect. Jude introduces him to Paul, saying he believes in his innocence, and gives Paul his card. Bryce updates Lindauer on Jude seeing the body and suspects, and Lindauer orders Jude off the property and away from the investigation. Reese wakes up, allowing Sophie to take samples, and Sophie wants to use Reese's DNA for the upgrades, but doesn't understand the dangers. Reese warns only that 7% of humans can safely use her DNA. Greta manipulates Paul, explaining her mission and asking for his help, and Nestor holds Dr. Han, who refuses to identify herself, believing she's homeless. Gabe informs Marshall about Emma's body, and Roy gives Marshall Hannah's locket, hinting at destiny. Lindauer tortures Reese to prevent her fugue state, and Sophie smuggles a vial of Reese's blood in her cane. Jude retrieves Emma's rental car key fob and sends its data to Martin, who provides a map of her travels. Rebecca sneaks to Naomi's cabin after Caleb sleeps, and Paul records a false message claiming the refugees are a death cult. Greta plans to use it to justify an upcoming mass suicide at the camp, convincing Lindauer of its necessity. Rebecca remembers Rachel's kidnapping by Apex in 2194, and Caleb convinces her to time travel safely, though she feels pretty torn about it. Jude and Nestor investigate Emma's murder and a suspicious homeless woman who turns out to be Diana, one of the key people who operated the time machine and the one who sent the first arrivals. Greta lies to Paul about Emma and then reveals she left him because he asked too many questions, and Caleb confronts the deceptive Naomi. Paul calls Jude about the suicide cult recording, refusing details. Jude realizes that it's a pretext for murder. Bryce questions Naomi, who demands safe passage for herself and the 4 others, promising wealth. Bryce refuses, but agents overhear. Jude updates Diana, realizing Lindauer coerced Paul into making the recording to eliminate the refugees. Naomi manipulates Rebecca and plans an escape, and Bryce confronts them, gets shot, and Roy calls for help. Jude and Diana plan to rescue the refugees, joined by Marshall, and they then use Marshall's trailer as a base. Lindauer is ordered to shut down the refugee camp within 24 hours. He and Eve accelerate their mass murder plan, with Doyle overseeing it, and Leia is sent back to the camp. Jude and Nestor raid the evidence locker for supplies to help Diana build a device to save the refugees. Sophie's condition worsens and she contemplates taking an Apex serum that could kill her, and Diana builds an EMP generator to aid in the rescue. Leia recruits with Caleb at the camp, and Lindauer briefs agents about moving refugees to detonation facilities and administering vaccinations. Jude is frustrated with Sophie for not informing him about Reese sooner, and they decide to rescue Reese to help save the refugees. Nestor and Jude plan their next step, realizing Lindauer has Leia and that Reese might cooperate if they save her. The doctor increases Reese's torture, bursting her eardrums, and her Apex strength surges and she breaks free. Eve gives Paul her new documentation and confesses she remarried when she arrived. Now divorced, she wants to start anew with Paul and he agrees. Lindauer questions Caleb, realizing their daughters Rachel and his own are the same, and he abruptly ends the interview. Eve introduces Paul to their son Aaron, presenting Paul as a dear friend. Paul is then moved to tears, meeting the son he never knew. Sophie and Jude help Reese escape the lab, and Reese kills the doctor and frees Sophie, learning Leia's location. Marshall brings supplies, but Nestor tries to keep him out of danger, and Marshall insists on helping, showing Hannah's locket and believing it signifies his purpose. Eve poisons Paul, revealing she did it to prevent future Apex slaughter. Lindauer confirms Rachel is Rebecca and Caleb's daughter, and Eve confirms the poison's effectiveness. Reese destroys Sophie's Apex cure, but Sophie has a real cure hidden. Diana leaves to find Reese, ignoring the refugee rescue, and Marshall slips a note for Caleb to Roy, then gets detained. Jude and Reese find Diana gone, but the EMP device was ready, and Reese deciphers the instructions. Dr. Spencer finds Sophie seemingly recovered, but she passes out, and Roy gives Marshall's note to Caleb, urging him to prepare for escape. Marshall, tied to a chair, is questioned by Lindauer and then tortured by Doyle. Lindauer leaves looking disturbed by Doyle's mentions. Jude testifies about Camp Tamanawas, and 2 weeks earlier, Lindauer planned to murder the refugees under the guise of transferring them. By the time of Jude's testimony, the camp is buried and detainees are gone, and evidence is contrary. Jude denies knowing their whereabouts, and Lindauer lies to the refugees about a transfer, planning to kill them with a vaccine. Thomas then gets a promise to be relocated to LA. Nestor crashes into a camp to find Marshall, allowing Reese to slip away. Lindauer releases Marshall, who receives a note from Roy. Caleb rallies the refugees to escape, supported by Thomas. Caleb and Roy meet Reese in the forest, and despite being Apex and Alpha Zulu, they agree to work together for the refugees' safety. Reese assigns roles and Caleb leads the refugees, Roy disables the fence, and she handles the guards. Caleb insists on helping with the guards during the fight. Reese throws a guard's radio to Jude, who removes the tracking device and contacts Lindauer, misleading him about the children's location. Lindauer orders a camp search, and Roy pretends to search Naomi's cabin, where refugees hide. Leia reads Naomi's writing but is hushed, and Thomas has a panic attack, causing concern. Jude, Nestor, and Marshall wait outside the fence, and Roy sabotages the power but is caught by Doyle. Jude cuts the fence and enters the camp, and Reese leads the refugees out. They face a tense moment as the power might return, potentially electrocuting anyone touching the fence. Doyle takes Roy to an interrogation cabin, where Lindauer accuses him of helping the refugees, but Roy denies it, and Doyle beats him up for answers. Jude sneaks in, overhearing Roy defending the refugees, and bursts in with his gun. Doyle holds Roy at gunpoint, forcing Jude to surrender. Jude tries to reason with Lindauer, who unexpectedly shoots and kills Doyle. Lindauer releases Roy, and he and Jude discuss the moral implications of their actions, and he questions how far one would go to stop evil before becoming evil themselves. Jude brings out the EMP device meant to erase records of the refugees, but Lindauer warns that his personal records remain. In the present, Jude testifies before a task force, revealing the disappearance of records and Lindauer himself. Afterward, Jude visits Marshall, Hannah, and Caleb in hiding, and he informs them that the government has no information on the refugees and gives them new documentation. Hannah, still recovering from the electrocution, wants to help Marshall inform the others. Caleb then asks about Rebecca. Jude gives him a note from Lindauer, and Reese and Leia arrive, with Leia mentioning Jude's name appeared repeatedly in Naomi's writing, though she can't recall specifics. Lindauer gives Caleb a photo of his daughter Rachel and a note with her location. Caleb finds Rachel at college, and they have a tearful reunion. Lindauer, standing by a river, rejects a call from Eve, crushes his phone's SIM card, throws it into the water, and walks away. Eve was unhappy with Jude's task force testimony and receives news that Sophie was in a hospital in Eugene. She then sends Jake to deal with it. Roy now works for Jude at the police station, maintaining boundaries by calling him sheriff. Jude and Nestor plan to search for Naomi and her cult for information about the future, and the time travel detector in the evidence room remains inactive. Eve's hitman tries to kill Sophie in the hospital bed, but she awakens, crushes his arm and kills him, and Sophie finally leaves the hospital fully healed and healthy, becoming the first Apex. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.